Hello, everyone. Got a few dirty jokes for you today.
So an elderly gentleman was invited to his old friend's home for dinner one evening. He was impressed by the way his buddy always called his wife using very sweet names. Honey, my love, darling, sweetheart, pumpkin, etc. The couple had been married almost 70 years, and clearly they were still very much in love. While the wife was in the kitchen, the man leaned over and said to his host, "I think it's wonderful that, after all these years, you still call your wife those loving names." The old man hung his head. "I have to tell you the truth," he said. "I forgot her name about 10 years ago." So one Sunday morning, everyone in a tiny town got up early and went to the local church. Before the services started, the townspeople were sitting in their pews and talking about their lives and families. Suddenly, Satan appeared at the front of the church. Everyone started screaming and running for the front entrance, trampling each other in a frantic effort to get away from evil incarnate. Soon everyone was evacuated from the church, except for one elderly gentleman who sat calmly in his pew, not moving, seemingly oblivious to the fact that God's ultimate enemy was in his presence. Now, this confused Satan a bit, so he walked up to the man and said, "Don't you know who I am?" The man replied, "I sure do." Satan asked, "Aren't you afraid of me?" "Nope, sure ain't," said the man. Satan was a little perturbed at this and queried, "Why aren't you afraid of me?" The man calmly replied, "Been married to your sister for over 48 years. So just before the funeral services, the Undertaker came up to the very elderly widow and asked, "How old was your husband?" 98, she replied, 2 years older than me. "So you're 96, the Undertaker commented. She responded, "Hardly worth going home, is it?" So a contractor dies in a car accident on his 40th birthday and finds himself at the pearly gates. A brass band is playing. The angels are singing a beautiful hymn. There is a huge crowd cheering and shouting his name, and absolutely everyone wants to shake his hand. Just when he thinks things can't possibly get any better, St. Peter himself runs over, apologizes for not greeting him personally at the pearly gates, shakes his hand, and says, "Congratulations, son. We've been waiting a long time for you." Totally confused and a little embarrassed, the contractor sheepishly looks at St. Peter and says, "I tried to lead a God-fearing life. I loved my family. I tried to obey the 10 Commandments, but congratulations for what? I honestly don't remember doing anything really special when I was alive." St. Peter was totally amazed at the man's modesty and said, "We're celebrating the fact that you lived to be 160 years old. God himself wants to see you." The contractor is awestruck and can only look at St. Peter with his mouth wide open. When he regains his power of speech, he looks up at St. Peter and says, "I lived my life in the eternal hope that when I died, I would be judged by God and be found to be worthy, but I only lived to be 40. "That's simply impossible, son," says St. Peter. "We've added up your timesheets." So an older couple was lying in bed one night. The husband was drifting off to sleep, but the wife was feeling romantic and wanted to talk. She said softly, "You used to hold my hand when we were courting." With a sigh, he reached over, held her hand for a moment, then rolled back to his side. "A minute later," she whispered, "and you used to kiss me." A bit annoyed, he leaned over, gave her a quick peck on the cheek, and turned back to sleep. A few moments passed. Then she said, "You used to nibble on my neck." So he threw back the covers and got out of bed. Startled, she asked, "Where are you going?" He grumbled, "To get my teeth." So the church held a marriage seminar, and the priest invited Luigi, who was approaching his 50th wedding anniversary, to share his secret to a long, happy marriage. Luigi stood up and said, "Well, Father, I always tried to treat her with kindness, and I never hesitated to spend a little money on her. But the best thing I ever did was take her to Italy for our 20th anniversary." The audience smiled, and the priest beamed. "Luigi, that's beautiful. You're an inspiration to every husband here. So tell us, what are you planning for your wife for your 50th anniversary?" Luigi nodded proudly and said, "I'm gonna go and bring her back." So, toward the end of Sunday service, the minister asked, "How many of you have forgiven your enemies?" 80% held up their hands. The minister then repeated his question. Everyone held up their hands this time, except one small elderly lady. "Mrs. Neely, are you not willing to forgive your enemies?" "I don't have any," she replied, smiling sweetly. "Mrs. Neely, that is very unusual. How old are you?" 98, she replied. "Oh, Mrs. Neely, would you please come down in front and tell us all how a person can live 98 years and not have an enemy in the world?" The little sweetheart of a lady tottered down the aisle, faced the congregation, and said, "I outlived the bastards." So a stingy old lawyer who had been diagnosed with a terminal illness was determined to prove wrong the old saying, "You can't take it with you." After much thought and consideration, the old ambulance chaser finally figured out how to take at least some of his money with him when he died. He instructed his wife to go to the bank and withdraw enough money to fill 2 pillowcases. He then directed her to take the bags of money to the attic and leave them directly above his bed. His plan was that, when he passed away, he would reach out and grab the bags on his way to heaven. Several weeks after the funeral, the deceased lawyer's wife was up in the attic cleaning when she came upon the 2 forgotten pillowcases stuffed with cash. She smiled and said to herself, "He should have placed it in the basement." So 2 babies are born in the same hospital at the exact same time. Room 203, side by side in their little incubators. Nurses say it was adorable, both boys, blinking up at the fluorescent lights like they were already disappointed in the world. One turns his head, sees the other, and gives the tiniest nod. The other blinks, unimpressed. From that moment on, it's like they silently agreed to keep tabs on each other. They grow up in completely different cities, never meeting again. One becomes a history teacher with 3 ex-wives and a cat that hates him. The other ends up a jazz musician who always smelled faintly of whiskey and regret. 80 years pass. Life happens. Wars, marriages, mortgages, prostate exams, all the highlights. Then, by some ridiculous twist of fate, they end up in the same hospital, in the same room, dying within hours of each other. The nurse says, "Wow, what a coincidence." But neither of them is impressed. They've been through too much. They look at each other across their beds, old, wrinkled, tubes in every orifice imaginable. One squints and says, "You look familiar." The other croaks out, "Room 203, 1945, incubators." Without missing a beat, they both laugh, which quickly turns into coughing. Finally, one says, "So what you think?" The other guy stares at the ceiling for a long moment and goes, "I just wish the breast-sucking part came at the end." So an old man and a 20-year-old are paired together at a golf tournament. They're playing a long par 5 that doglegs around some tall trees. As the 20-year-old sets up his tee shot to hit onto the fairway, the old man says, "When I was your age, we used to hit over the trees, not around to the side." So the 20-year-old readjusts and tries to hit over the trees, but can't clear them and loses his ball. He tries again and loses that one too. Then the old man says, "Of course, when I was your age, the trees were only 6 foot tall." So 2 elderly women were eating breakfast in a restaurant one morning. Ethel noticed something funny about Mabel's ear, and she said, "Mabel, did you know you've got a suppository in your left ear?" She pulled it out and stared at it. Then she said, "Ethel, I'm glad you saw this thing. Now, I think I know where my hearing aid is." So an elderly gentleman went to see his doctor and asked for a prescription of Viagra. The doctor said, "That's no problem. How many do you want?" The man answered, "Just a few, maybe 4, but cut each one in 4 pieces." The doctor said, "That won't do you any good." The elderly gentleman said, "That's all right. I don't need them for making love anymore, as I am over 90 years old. I just want it to stick out far enough so I don't pee on my shoes." So an elderly couple is sitting in a quiet church as the preacher prepares to give his sermon. The wife whispers to her husband, "I need to pass gas, but I think it might be one of those silent but deadly farts." "What should I do?" The husband replies, "Change the battery in your hearing aid." So, an elderly gentleman had serious hearing problems for a number of years. He went to the doctor, and the doctor was able to have him fitted for a set of hearing aids that allowed the gentleman to hear 100%. The elderly gentleman went back in a month to the doctor, and the doctor said, "Your hearing is perfect. Your family must be really pleased that you can hear again." To which the gentleman said, "Oh, I haven't told my family yet. I just sit around and listen to the conversations. I've already changed my will 3 times." So 2 elderly women reunite at their 60th high school reunion. They're chatting and catching up on life, when one of them says, "I've been married 4 times. The other gasps, "4 times? Wow, what kind of men did you marry?" She smiles and replies, "Well, my first husband was a banker, my second was an actor, third was a rabbi, and my 4th he's an Undertaker." Her friend raises an eyebrow. "That's quite the lineup. Why such different men?" She grins and says, "Oh, I had a plan. 1 for the money, 2 for the show, 3 to get ready, and 4 to go." So the lion married off a child. Being the king of the jungle, he invited all the animals for the wedding. On the very special night, a mouse walks up the lion and says, "Congratulations, brother." The lion looks at the mouse and says, "Thanks, but since when am I your brother?" The mouse replied, "Well, I was once a lion too, but then I got married." So you know how important it is to stay active as we get older. So here's a little exercise routine I've been working on. I start by standing outside behind the house, holding a 5-pound potato sack in each hand. I extend my arms straight out to the sides and hold them there as long as I can. After a few weeks, I worked my way up to 10-pound sacks, then 50-pound sacks, and eventually, I was holding 100-pound potato sacks, one in each hand, with my arms straight out for over a full minute. Then I decided to really challenge myself, so I started putting a few potatoes in the sacks. So, a sweet little grandmother called St. Joseph's Hospital. In a soft, trembling voice, she asked, "Hello, is it possible to speak with someone who can tell me how a patient is doing?" The operator replied warmly, "Of course, dear. What's the name and room number?" The grandmother said, "Norma Findlay, room 302. The operator responded, "Hold on just a moment while I check with the nurses station." A few minutes later, the operator came back on the line. "I have great news. The nurse says Norma is doing very well. Her blood pressure is normal. Her labs came back perfect, and Dr. Cohen is planning to discharge her tomorrow." The grandmother let out a sigh of relief. "Oh, thank you. That's such wonderful news. I've been so worried. God bless you." The operator smiled. "You're very welcome. Is Norma your daughter?" There was a pause, then the grandmother said, "No, I am Norma Findlay in room 302. No one tells me a damn thing." So, a family took their frail, elderly mother to a nursing home and left her, hoping she would be well cared for. The next morning, the nurses bathed her, fed her a tasty breakfast, and set her in a chair at a window overlooking a lovely flower garden. She seemed okay, but after a while, she slowly started to tilt sideways in her chair. Two attentive nurses immediately rushed up to catch her and straighten her up. Again, she seemed okay, but after a while, she slowly started to tilt over to her other side. The nurses rushed back and once more brought her back upright. This went on all morning. Later, the family arrived to see how the old woman was adjusting to her new home. "So, Grandma, how is it here? Are they treating you all right?" "It's pretty nice," she replied, "except they won't let me fart." So, hospital regulations require all patients to be discharged in a wheelchair. While working as a student nurse, I came across an elderly gentleman already dressed, sitting on the edge of his bed with a suitcase at his feet, who insisted he didn't need any help leaving. After a little back and forth about rules being rules, he finally gave in and let me wheel him to the elevator. As we were riding down, I made some small talk and asked, "So, is your wife coming to pick you up?" He shrugged and said, "I'm not sure. She's still upstairs in the bathroom, changing out of her hospital gown." So, a middle-aged woman had a heart attack and was rushed to the hospital. While on the operating table, she had a near-death experience. She saw God and asked, "Is my time up?" God replied, "No, my child. You have another 43 years, 2 months, and 8 days to live." After recovering, the woman decided to make the most of her time. She stayed in the hospital and got a facelift, liposuction, and a tummy tuck. Since she had decades ahead, she figured she might as well look her best. A few days later, she was released from the hospital. But as she was crossing the street on her way home, she was struck and killed by an ambulance. When she arrived at the gates of heaven, she looked at God and said, "I thought you said I had 43 more years. Why didn't you save me?" God stared for a moment and said, "My child, I'm sorry. I didn't even recognize you." So a policeman noticed an old lady standing on a street corner during a sudden windstorm. She was bracing herself by holding a light post with one hand, and she was holding her hat snugly against her head with her other hand. Unfortunately, a strong gust blew her dress upward, and it continued to flap in the wind, exposing her privates for everyone to see. The policeman saw her and asked, "Hey, lady, everybody is taking a look at what you've got. Don't you think that pulling your dress down is more important than worrying about your hat?" The old lady smiled and said, "Look here, Sonny. What these people are looking at is 85 years old, but the hat is brand new." So an elderly woman went into the pharmacy. When the pharmacist asked why she was there, she replied, "I'd like to have some birth control pills." Taken aback, the pharmacist thought for a minute and then said, "Excuse me, Mrs. Smith, but you're 75 years old. What possible use could you have for birth control pills?" The woman responded, "They help me sleep better." The pharmacist thought some more and continued, "How in the world do birth control pills help you to sleep?" The woman said, "I put them in my granddaughter's orange juice and I sleep better at night." So an elderly man walked into a confessional booth. When the priest arrived, the man took a deep breath and began his confession. "Father, I have to tell you something. I am 82 years old, and I've been married to my wonderful wife for 60 years. We have many children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. But yesterday, something happened that I never thought would happen to me." The priest listened attentively as the man went on to describe his encounter with two college girls who he had picked up while they were hitchhiking. He explained how they had ended up in a motel together and how he had ended up making love with each of them twice. The priest's face was aghast as he listened to the man's story. "Are you sorry for your sins?" he asked the man. "What sins?" replied the man with a grin on his face. The priest was taken aback. "What kind of a Catholic are you?" he asked incredulously. The man laughed. "Pardon me, Father, I'm not a Catholic. I'm Jewish." The priest was confused. "So why are you telling me all this?" The man smiled and said, "At my age, I'm telling everybody." So a little silver-haired lady calls her neighbor and says, "Can you please come over and help me? I've got this killer jigsaw puzzle, and I just can't figure out how to get it started." Her neighbor asks, "What's it supposed to be when it's done?" She replies, "According to the picture on the box, it's a rooster." Curious, he heads over to her house. She lets him in and leads him to the table, where the puzzle pieces are spread out everywhere. He looks at the pieces, then at the box, then back at the pieces. After a long pause, he gently takes her hand and says, "Okay, first of all, no matter what we do, these pieces are never going to look like a rooster." Then he gives a little sigh and adds, "Second, let's have a nice cup of tea, and then we'll put all the cornflakes back in the box." So Cinderella was now 75 years old. After a fulfilling life with a now passed away prince, she happily sat upon her rocking chair, watching the world go by from her front porch with a cat called Alan for companionship. One sunny afternoon, out of nowhere, appeared the fairy godmother. Cinderella said, "Fairy godmother, what are you doing here after all these years?" The fairy godmother replied, "Well, Cinderella, as you have lived a good, wholesome life since we last met, I have decided to grant you 3 wishes. Is there anything for which your heart still yearns?" Cinderella was overjoyed, and after some thoughtful consideration, almost under her breath, she uttered her first wish. "I wish I was wealthy beyond comprehension." Instantly, her rocking chair was turned into solid gold. Cinderella was stunned. "Alan, Her old, faithful cat jumped off her lap and scampered to the edge of the porch, quivering with fear. Cinderella said, "Oh, thank you, fairy godmother." The fairy godmother replied, "It's the least I can do. What does your heart desire for your second wish?" Cinderella looked down at her frail body and said, "I wish I were young and full of the beauty of youth again." At once, her wish became reality, and her beautiful, youthful visage returned. Cinderella felt stirrings inside her that had been dormant for years, and long-forgotten vigor and vitality began to course through her very soul. Then the fairy godmother again spoke. "You have one more wish. What will you have?" Cinderella looked over to the frightened cat in the corner and said, "I wish you to transform Alan, my old cat, into a beautiful and handsome young man." Magically, Alan suddenly underwent a fundamental change in his biological makeup that, when complete, he stood before her, a boy so beautiful, the likes of which neither she nor the world had ever seen. So fair indeed that birds began to fall from the sky at his feet. The fairy godmother again spoke. "Congratulations, Cinderella. Enjoy your new life." And, with a blazing shock of bright blue electricity, she was gone. For a few eerie moments, Alan and Cinderella looked into each other's eyes. Cinderella sat, breathless, gazing at the most stunningly perfect boy she had ever seen. Then Alan walked over to Cinderella, who sat transfixed in her rocking chair, and held her close in his strong, youthful arms. He leaned in close to her ear, blowing her golden hair with his warm breath, and whispered, "I bet you regret having me neutered now, don't you?" So the doctor is amazed at what good shape the guy is in and asks, "How do you stay in such great physical condition?" "I'm Scottish, and I am a golfer," says the old guy, "and that's why I'm in such good shape. I'm up well before daylight and out golfing up and down the fairways. I have a glass of whiskey, and all is well." "Well," says the doctor, "I'm sure that helps, but there's got to be more to it. How old was your dad when he died?" "Who said my dad is dead?" The doctor is amazed. "You mean you're 80 years old and your dad's still alive?" "How old is he?" "He's 100 years old," says the old Scottish golfer. "In fact, he golfed with me this morning, and then we went to the topless beach for a walk and had another glass of whiskey, and that's why he's still alive. He's Scottish, and he's a golfer too." "Well," the doctor says, "that's great, but I'm sure there's more to it than that. How about your dad's dad? How old was he when he died?" "Who said my granddad's died?" Stunned, the doctor asks, "You mean you're 80 years old and your grandfather's still living?" "Incredible. How old is he?" "He's 118 years old," says the old Scottish golfer. The doctor is getting frustrated at this point. "So, I guess he went golfing with you this morning too?" "No. Granddad couldn't go this morning because he's getting married today." At this point, the doctor is close to losing it. Getting married? Why would a 118-year-old guy want to get married? The old man smiled and replied, "Who said he wanted to?" So an elderly couple decide they want to have a baby. So they go to the doctor. "Doctor," they say, "we've decided that we want to have another baby." The doctor looks at them, at a loss for words. "You do realize that at your age, it's pretty much impossible. The likelihood that you will even get pregnant is about 0, and the chance of complications are really high. I think you should go home and think about this again." But the couple was not to be dissuaded. "No, we want another baby." They go back and forth a few times until finally the doctor pulls out a small vial. The doctor looks at the husband and says, "I'll tell you what. Fill this up with semen over the next few days. If you are able to do so, we will go over what options you have." The husband happily agrees, and the couple goes home. A week later, the couple returns. The husband pulls out the vial and plops it on the doctor's desk. It was empty. The doctor asks, "What happened?" The husband responded, "Look, doctor, I'll be honest. I tried with my right hand. I tried with my left hand. I tried with both hands. I even asked my next-door neighbor to help, but we couldn't get the stupid vial open." So while on a road trip, an elderly couple stopped at a roadside restaurant for lunch. After finishing their meal, they left the restaurant and resumed their trip. When leaving, the elderly woman unknowingly left her glasses on the table, and she didn't miss them until they had been driving for about 40 minutes. By then, to add to the aggravation, they had to travel quite a distance before they could find a place to turn around in order to return to the restaurant to retrieve her glasses. All the way back, the elderly husband became the classic grouchy old man. He fussed and complained and scolded his wife relentlessly during the entire return drive. The more he chided her, the more agitated he became. He just wouldn't let up for a single minute. To her relief, they finally arrived at the restaurant. As the woman got out of the car and hurried inside to retrieve her glasses, the old geezer yelled to her, "While you're in there, you might as well get my hat and the credit card." So an elderly couple was driving cross-country, and the woman was driving. She gets pulled over by the highway patrol. The officer says, "Did you know you were speeding?" The woman turns to her husband and asks, "What did he say?" The old man yells, "He says you were speeding." The patrolman says, "May I see your license?" The woman turns to her husband and asks, "What did he say?" The old man yells, "He wants to see your license." The woman gives him her license. The patrolman says, "I see you are from Arkansas. I spent some time there once. Had the worst night with a woman I have ever had." The woman turns to her husband and asks, "What did he say?" "He thinks he knows you," the old man yells.